I work at a gas station located at kilometer 142 of a rarely traveled route. At 3 a.m., the world seems to stop. All you can hear is the wind rattling the metal signs and the hum of the refrigerators. My main task, besides attending to the few truckers who pass by, is to keep the place clean. That night, I decided to clean the customer bathrooms, which are on the side of the main building, out of direct sight from the register. I entered the men's room with a bucket and bleach. It was completely dry and empty. I scrubbed the tiles, mopped the floor until it was gleaming, and breathed in that sharp smell of disinfectant that burns your nose. On my way out, I locked the door. During this shift, we only opened the bathroom upon request to keep out animals or loiterers. I went back to the booth and poured myself a coffee. Not a single car passed in the next 10 minutes. No one asked for the key. No one walked toward that area. However, I felt a strange curiosity, a gut feeling that forced me to go back. When I opened the door with my master key, the smell of bleach was gone. Instead, the air smelled like stagnant water, like an old river. I flipped the light switch and froze. The floor I had left spotless and dry just minutes before was covered in a layer of murky water. It wasn't a leak from the faucets or the toilet. The water seemed to be seeping directly from the grout between the tiles. In the middle of the puddle, there was a trail of barefoot prints leading straight to the last stall, which was locked from the inside. I stood motionless in the doorway, the murky water brushing against the soles of my boots. There was no physical way anyone could have entered. The master key was on my belt, and I hadn't taken my eyes off the only camera pointing at the outer hallway. The silence in the bathroom was thick, broken only by a rhythmic dripping that didn't come from the faucets, but from behind the door of that last stall. "Hello, is anyone there?" I asked, my voice echoing off the damp tiles. There was no answer, but the barefoot prints on the floor began to darken, as if the mud was settling. I stepped closer slowly, reaching my hand toward the laminated wood door. As I touched it, I felt a vibration, a dull hum that traveled up my fingers. I pushed hard. The stall was empty. There was no one sitting there, no clothes, no trace of an intruder. However, the toilet was overflowing with thick, black water that brought with it bits of aquatic vegetation and mold. The most terrifying part was looking up, on the white ceiling, right above where I was standing. There was a massive damp stain in the perfect shape of a human hand, as if someone had been hanging from the upper pipes while I was cleaning just minutes before. I stumbled out of there and locked the door with a double padlock. I didn't go back in all night. The next morning, when my relief arrived, I told him what happened. He was an older man who had been on this route for years, and he wasn't surprised. He took me to the back of the gas station and pointed to a small, dry creek bed a few yards from the building. Years ago, before the station was built, there was a flash flood, he told me, while lighting a cigarette. A traveler got trapped in the old inn that used to stand right here. They say the last thing he tried was to seek refuge in the highest place he could find. I looked toward the bathroom and remembered the stain on the ceiling. Since that day, whenever I work the late shift, I leave a bucket of clean water and a fresh towel by the bathroom door before locking it. I never check it again after 3 a.m. I know that if the floor is wet by morning, it's because someone who still feels the mud on their skin is just looking for a clean place to rest from the current. I work at the Route 7 station, a filling station that is little more than an island of light in the middle of miles of dark countryside. At 2 a.m., the silence is so deep that you can hear a truck engine approaching 10 minutes before it arrived. That's why, when I saw yellowish headlights entering the lot, it didn't surprise me, but it did strike me as odd that I hadn't heard the engine before seeing it. It was an old tanker truck, the kind with a rounded cab and rusted metal that you hardly see on modern routes anymore. It parked with mathematical precision in front of pump number 4, the one furthest from the shop. I watched through the camera as the driver's door opened and a tall man stepped out, wearing dark coveralls and a cap that hid half his face. The man walked toward the shop with heavy steps, making the gravel crunch. When he entered, the door sensor didn't chime, but the cold that came in with him chilled me to the bone. He didn't say a word. He walked straight to the coffee machine, filled a paper cup, and approached the counter. I stared at him, waiting for him to say something, but he kept his eyes down. The smell coming off him was unbearable, a mix of old gasoline, rusted iron, and something sweet like rotting fruit. He pulled a bill from his pocket and placed it on the counter. The paper was soaking wet, leaving a dark stain on the clean wood. "That's $5, I said, trying to stay calm. He didn't respond. He simply pointed a gloved finger toward pump 4. I looked through the large window and saw the nozzle connected to the truck's tank, but the pump's digital counter remained at 0. Not a single drop of fuel was coming out. When I looked back at the man to tell him, he was already walking out the door carrying the coffee, which, strangely, wasn't letting off any steam. I stared at the wet bill on the counter. The paper was disintegrating, oozing a dark liquid that smelled like old gas and damp earth. I stepped out of the booth and walked to the window. The truck was still there, under the flickering light of the pump. But there was no sound of an engine, no fuel dripping, not even the sound of the wind. I decided to go out to the lot. The early morning cold hit my face, but it was a different kind of cold, dry and heavy. I approached pump 4. The hose was hooked to the truck's tank, just as I had seen. But when I touched the metal of the tanker, my hand passed through a layer of frost so thick it burned. The truck wasn't hot from travel. It was freezing, as if it had been submerged in a deep well for decades. "Hey, sir," I shouted toward the truck cab. "The pump isn't registering anything." No answer. I peered into the driver's window, and my heart leapt into my throat. The seat was empty. The cup of coffee the man had just bought was sitting on the dashboard, but the cardboard was dry and flattened, as if it had been lying there for years. Suddenly, the nozzle detached itself from the tank and snapped back into its holster with a dry thud. In that instant, the truck began to fade, not like a ghost vanishing, but like cigarette smoke dissolving in the air. In less than 5 seconds, the area at pump 4 was completely deserted. I ran back to the office and rewound the security footage. My hands were shaking so much I could barely move the mouse. In the video, I saw myself talking to thin air at the counter. I saw a bill appear out of nowhere on the wood and the shop door open without anyone walking in. But the most terrifying part was the outdoor camera. Pump 4 never had a truck parked there. During that entire time, the spot was empty, save for a patch of black oil forming on the ground exactly where the truck was standing. Since then, every time I see yellowish lights approaching in silence at 2 a.m., I turn off the shop lights and lock myself in the back office. I don't care about losing the sale. I know that if I accept another of those wet bills, the next one to vanish into the asphalt might be me. The gas station where I work is on a stretch of highway that is straight for nearly 20 kilometers. From the shop door, you can see the lights of any vehicle approaching from an eternity before they arrive. It's an advantage to know when to stop cleaning and get behind the counter. But that Thursday night, the road decided to play by different rules. It was 2:45 a.m. I was leaning on the counter with a thermos of coffee, looking through the large window toward the south. Far off, at the point where the asphalt merges with the blackness of the fields, two yellowish dots appeared, headlights. They were coming at a steady speed, swaying slightly as an old car does over the irregularities of the road. I estimated it would take about 5 minutes to arrive. I prepared the register and waited. The headlights grew larger, brighter. I could see them illuminating the reflective signs on the sides of the road. One by one, the curve in 500 meters sign, the no passing sign. But when the lights were less than 200 meters from the entrance to the lot, right where they should have illuminated our station's giant sign, they simply went out. There was no braking, no sound of an engine failing, no trace of a car veering off to the shoulder, simply void. I stared into the absolute darkness, expecting to see hazard lights or the silhouette of the vehicle, but there was nothing. 5 minutes later, the same two lights appeared again at exactly the same starting point, 20 kilometers away, repeating the journey toward me. Over and over, the lights advanced, lit up the same signs, and vanished before reaching my door, as if the road were a scratched videotape resetting before reaching the end. It couldn't be an optical illusion. The reflective signs shone with real intensity every time those lights approached. I put on my jacket, grabbed the metal flashlight, one of those heavy ones we carry on the night shift, and walked out to the lot. The air was unusually still, without the sound of crickets or wind in the grass. I stood right at the edge of the shoulder, where the asphalt meets the dirt, exactly where the lights used to vanish. In the distance, the two yellow dots appeared again. They came toward me, steady, rhythmic. I pointed my flashlight at them and turned on the strobe so they would see me. The headlights kept coming, illuminating the curve in 500 meters sign. They were 50 meters away, then 20. The glare was so strong I had to squint. I felt the displacement of frigid wind that hit my chest, as if a massive vehicle had passed inches from my body at full speed. I heard the hum of tires on the pavement, a real physical sound that made the ground vibrate beneath my feet. But in front of me, the road remained empty. No engine, no bodywork, no trace of metal. Only the yellow glow that passed through me as if I were made of smoke. I went back into the shop, my legs trembling. I sat behind the counter and tried to calm my breathing. That was when I looked down and saw it, on the floor at the entrance. Right where I had just stepped, after coming in from the road, there were splashes of fresh black oil. But they weren't normal stains. They were shaped like violent splatters, as if a car had slammed on its brakes right over my feet. I went back out with the flashlight, this time pointing it at the road surface. I didn't find skid marks, but I did find something stranger. At the exact spot where the lights vanished every night, I found an object lying on the shoulder, an old leather keychain, eaten away by time, with a rusted key that didn't belong to any of the modern car models that pass through here. I never found out who it belonged to or what happened on that stretch of road. No one in town remembers a recent accident, and the records say nothing. However, every night at 2:45 a.m., the cycle begins again. The lights advance, the wind hits me, and the keychain reappears in the same spot. Even if I lock it in the cash drawer every morning, there are things simply trapped in a fold of the road, repeating their arrival at a destination they will never reach, and I have decided to stop asking why. Working the night shift sharpens your sights in a strange way. You learn to read people before they even roll down their window, the exhaustion of the truckers, the hurry of the night travelers, or the anxiety of those running from something. But a few months ago, I started noticing a pattern that has nothing to do with psychology, but with something much more physical and terrifying. It happened first with a grey sedan that pulled up to pump 2. The driver got out, asked me to fill the tank, and went into the shop to buy water. While the pump was running, I glanced at the back seat. Through the tinted glass, I saw the silhouette of someone sitting right behind the driver. They were completely motionless, their head tilted slightly toward the window, as if staring fixedly at the pump. It seemed odd that they didn't get out, or move at all, even when the car rocked slightly as the fuel nozzle clicked off. When the driver returned, I made a casual comment to break the ice. "Your companion is a deep sleeper, huh?" The man stopped with his hand on the door, looked at me with genuine confusion, and frowned. "Companion? I'm driving alone from the capital, friend. My back seat is full of moving boxes." My blood ran cold. I looked again. The car was lit up by the station's sodium vapor lights, which are so strong they reveal every detail. Behind the glass, boxes were stacked to the ceiling, filling the entire space. There was no room for a person, but the silhouette was still there, superimposed over the box, a dark, human shape that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. And the most terrifying part is that just before the engine started, I saw that silhouette slowly turn its head toward me, even though it had no face, only a black void where its gaze should be. After that night, I started paying more attention. What I first thought was a trick of the light or exhaustion became a macabre constant. It didn't happen with every car, only with those coming from the darkest stretches of the route, those where there isn't a single light pole for miles. One early morning, a delivery truck stopped at pump 1, while the driver got out to stretch his legs. I looked at the cab through the truck's side mirror. There it was, a figure sitting in the passenger seat, back rigid and hands resting on its knees. The driver was standing next to me, lighting a cigarette. I asked him if he was carrying anyone. "Just my dog in the back," he replied, laughing. But when I looked again, the figure wasn't a dog. It was the silhouette of a man with hunched shoulders, as if he were cold. The most disturbing part is that when the driver got back into the cab, he sat on top of where the silhouette was, as if the space were occupied by two different realities that didn't touch. The figure didn't leave. It simply merged with the back of the seat, maintaining its human shape behind the driver's body. I understood then that these things aren't living people, but they aren't ghosts meant to scare you either. They are remains. They are shadows that climb in during the lonely stretches, seeking the warmth of an engine or the company of someone who still breathes. They stay there, motionless, accompanying the driver in their solitude, feeding off the silence of the road. The last time I saw it was 3 days ago. A family car pulled up to refuel. In the back, 2 children were sleeping peacefully with their pillows, and between them, sitting in the middle seat, was that dark smudge. It had its arms outstretched, one over each child, as if protecting them or measuring them. The father paid me with a tired smile, unaware that he was carrying a third presence, watching over his children's sleep. Now, when a car pulls into the lot, I no longer look at the driver. I look directly at the back seat. If I see that motionless silhouette, I simply fill the tank in silence, avoid eye contact, and say nothing. I've learned that there are passengers who don't pay for a ticket. And if you try to point them out, they might decide you are a much more interesting host than the seat of a car just passing through.